Hello and welcome back to Los Comics TV. I'm your host, Javier Hernandez. And look, I have a twin. There's two Javier Hernandez. Yes, we have our camera flexible arm holder thingy, so now I can use two hands to entice you with. So anyway, it's Thursday, March 26th, 2020, but we're gonna go back almost 40 years, right? So I'm gonna do the math on that. To 1974, and this I think is 1978, maybe. Anyway, these are some books I got when I was younger, much younger. So I'm gonna show these books, talk about them, and just kind of explain not just how much I love these books, but how much they influence what I did later. So anyway, the first book here, let's go with this one. Actually, yeah, let's go with this one first. Origins of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee. The book's written by Stan Lee. So it's basically a history of the Marvel Comics, starting, in the 1961 with the launch of the Fantastic Four, followed by, Hulk, Thor, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, everybody. So this is my original copy. Look, I can prove it. See? This cover fell off a couple of years ago. And actually, it's kind of funny. I've been thinking of, looking online for what type of tape I should buy that's acid-free and archival and whatever, instead of just using the cheap tape I usually buy at the dollar store. But I should just use the regular tape, right? I'm sure it doesn't make a difference. Anyway, so this book here, I bought this at Bookland in Uptown Whittier. I live in Whittier, and we don't have a downtown Whittier, we have an uptown Whittier up on Greenleaf Avenue, and that's where we all hung out there in the early years. Ambrose Pizza, Lovell's Records, and of course Bookland was the big bookstore there. Carried new books, and of course they had a comic book section, magazine section, and they had a section with art books, which they kept, interestingly enough, behind the counter. So I remember when I'd pay for my comics, I'd look past the cashier at the wall, and I'd see all these old books by was it Fireside? I think it's a branch of Simon and Schuster. So anyway, this is Origins of Marvel Comics. And basically what it is, oh, check this out. I had it signed by Stan Lee about 10 years ago at some cartoonist functions called CAPS, Cartoon Art Professional Society. I guess every year they have a big gala, and they invite a big guest to talk and honor. So my friends, was it Michael Oshinker and Rafael Navarro, were members of CAPS at the time, and they invited me as their guest to come and check out Stan Lee. So I walked up to Stan. He had a huge line of people, and I presented him my copy. Hey Stan, I've been carrying this book around for 35 years. I think I deserve an autograph. So he signed it to my friend Javier, and that's pretty cool. So basically what this book is, it's a history of the early age of Marvel Comics. So it's broken up into chapters. The first one being Fantastic Four. That's the first Marvel comic, or at least that Marvel Age of Comics from the 60s. So, Stan talks about how he or they came up with it, they being him and Jack Kirby, the artist and basically designer of all the original Marvel, most of the Marvel universe. But anyway, this video is not going to be a discussion of the Stan Lee / Jack Kirby credit, whatever you want to call it, credit dilemma or historical legacy, because they both have huge legacies. But I will tell you, so it's from his point of view, although he does mention Jack Kirby quite a bit. And every chapter, so they have they reprint the original issue of Fantastic Four in this case, and then he would pick a well, it's funny. So Stan said he'd pick a more modern story, although this is issue 55, so it's like, what, a little over 4 years after the first issue. because Stan wasn't writing comics in the mid-70s. I guess he didn't want to pick a comic he wasn't working on, so he picked, although, you know, he's working with Jack Kirby on Silver Surfer. I mean, my gosh, doesn't get better than that. So the whole book is basically, like I said, different chapters, and then there's one on, I think Thor is the next one, or Hulk. No, the Hulk, yeah. And, you know, again, you know, things that inspired him or things that influenced him to make up this particular story, whatever. So like I said, the whole book, and then it's got another Hulk story. Of course, he wrote it, and it's, you know, different artist. Let me get to Spider-Man. It's really funny about that with this one. I mean, you know, when you're a kid, you're reading this, you kind of take it as, okay, well, that's how it was done. But then you get older and you read other, you know, historical books or articles. And of course, Steve Ditko, the artist of Spider-Man, he wrote plenty of essays about, you know, how the character was created from his point of view. And, you know, obviously, well, I'll be biased, but the facts, I think, point to the Spider-Man origin story not being exactly how it's written about in here. But that's not the point. Again, I'm a kid, and well, I got this book I was probably in middle school. So it was, what, 13, 14, might have been 12 when I got it. But, you know, it was really exciting to read just the idea of, you know, creating comics, creating a company. So as a kid, that's very influential, you know, because I read the comics by then, so, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years of reading the comics, and then to read the behind the scenes history. So you start getting kind of, you know, the seeds are being planted in that, okay, these are comics, but they're made by actual people, you know, and these people have, you know, ideas, influences, things they grew up with as kids and young adults that they absorbed and got inspired by and eventually translated into, you know, their own creativity. So this is a really big book. And there was a couple other ones in the series. Origin of Marvel Comics, Son of Origins of Marvel Comics. Then there was one of just the villains, bring on the bad guys. And then there was one of the superhero women, which covered a lot of the stuff Stan did not work on, because most of the female superheroes, for Marvel at least, started appearing in the 70s when he wasn't too involved. But you know what's interesting is looking at all the characters here. It's like, man, back then they were just comics, and now they're, you know, bankrolling these multi-billion dollar movie studio. I mean, it's not one of these characters. Maybe Submariner hasn't appeared in the film, but every single one of these has appeared in multiple films. It's, wow, yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's Robert Downey Jr., right, under that helmet. The other book, this one, yeah, I don't know exactly when I bought them, yeah, at the same time or a couple of years apart, but I was definitely in middle school, maybe just making it to high school when this one came out. How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I'm sure if you're into comics, you've heard so many artists and writers and people talk about when they got their book. And this book's still in print. This is my original hardcover. I don't know what it cost me back then. There's no price on it, but it's a little dog-eared here. But some years ago, I bought a dust jacket cover. Got to protect that book. Anyway, this is a treasured item for me. So this is the one that, okay, these other comics are made. So this one is written by Stan Lee, you know, the head writer, and John Buscema, one of the big artists at Marvel throughout the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, I think, maybe even the 90s. But I read, you know, he had worked on a lot of the main characters, and was very famous for Conan. But John Buscema was also he taught comic book classes, workshops in New York. So that was like a big thing in the 70s. I remember reading the ads for it in the comics. It's like, well, I'm a kid from California. How's he going to make it out to New York? But so that's why this book's such a big deal. Like, okay, here's all the secrets. So, you know, basically it just does a big quick survey on just all different type of storytelling lessons Maybe one day we can just go to the whole book, but I want to cover a couple of books today. Tools of the trade, talking about all the different professional tools that a real comic book artist uses. I was pretty much just stuck here at this stage, a pencil and an eraser. Did not have the inks or the, I'm sure I had a rag. The rag is what to clean your pen points. And a ruler, I remember getting a T-square at an art store uptown Whittier. And then, just start breaking down everything. The full comic page, when it's a full illustration, it's a splash page, right? Everything's annotated, word balloons, letters, indicia, credits. So, and then it's like showing samples of different camera shots and such, close-ups, the faces, right? Tight shot, panoramic long shot, a view of the street. This was always neat to me. This is a bird's eye view. It's Human Torch is flying in the air, submariners chasing him. Well, your point of view is above that, so you're higher up. Here's a shot of Spider-Man, but look at the point of view of the camera is down here. This is the worm's eye view, they tell us. So anyway, as a kid, just was like, oh wow, this is really interesting information. Because you had read the comics and you enjoyed them, but now you're understanding, oh, this has a name. It's a bird's eye view. It's a close-up. This type of stuff you see in any art book, how to draw shapes and shadows and such, light sources, but you got to cover that. And then there's things that are, and then perspective, of course, that's universal in any art book, any good art book. Throwing a superhero here and there, right? New York City. Some of this stuff at the time to me was like, man, this is complex. Perspective, grid lines, 2-3 point perspective, right? But it's all building block, which I would learn later in college. Like, oh yeah, I remember John Buscema talking about that. But it's like, okay, let's get back to the superheroes and the action. This was an interesting chapter. Let's study the figure. Right, breaking up how many head heights body is, man and woman, Mr. Fantastic, Invisible Woman. I used to trace this a lot. I used to trace him and her because I'd trace them and then I would make up my own costumes, make up my own characters. So that was kind of fun. So again, fundamentals of drawing, circular, a bunch of circles connected together makes the figure. Let me jump ahead because I don't want to take all the time just on this great book. So again, a lot of fundamentals that any good art instructor would teach you. But the thing that really stood out to me a lot, and what I think was really helpful for so many people, drawing the head. So let's skip just the basic, the standard fundamental stuff. Let's get to the comic book page. Right, so break down the page. Let me just go here. So here's a finished page or penciled. So then they would just show you start doing stick figures basically, right? Blocking out where everything is. This guy's coming in the top of the page. Red Skull shoots a gun at him. This guy falls, he pulls out a gun. The gun's broken down into shapes. And then, once you figure out that page, the fundamentals, where everything goes, you start fleshing it out. And then you get to hopefully this comes up on the camera. You flesh it out to a fully penciled, detailed, and then someone would come in and ink it, unless the penciler himself does it, but usually a separate inker. Again, another Spider-Man page here, another page with Spider-Man. And anyway, like I said, this was like eye-opening as a kid. Like, wow, look at this. Look at the final page. I think I have this comic, or he recreated it, but I remember this story. But to go backwards and see it stripped down in the beginning to stick figures and then fleshed out and such, all amazing. And then they also do cover design. I remember this cover. This was a crossover with Amazing Spider-Man. So, different sketches, different ideas they're playing with, figure out what they want to do. And then they settle on this one. And then, of course, start building it up with the shapes, and the final pencil, and the final ink. So anyway, again, when you're a kid, you've never seen something like this. You've never seen this explained in this format. And it's helpful too because you're familiar with a lot of these comics already. You had actually read them, but out to see how they're made. It's like the DVD documentaries when they were coming out, behind the scenes of the movie or the director commentary. So this was really neat having this as a kid. And of course they talk about inking. Like I said, it's a general overview on the whole process of building a comic page. So another fantastic, inspirational book and an heirloom for me. So just to tie it into the present and to start wrapping this up, I've been making comics since 1998. This is a collection I did of several of my comics. This came out in 2013. That's like 7 years ago. So this was the 15th anniversary of when I first started publishing. So these 5 comics, these are my comics, are represented in this book. So I wanted to do my own origins of Marvel Comics. This is the Los Comics Codex. So I reprinted, those 5 stories, and I did an intro, just giving a whole back story of growing up, name checking some of the old Marvel and DC comics I read as a kid. Just really talking about growing up as a kid, going into high school, college, learning about art, fine art, as well as, lifelong immersion in comic book art. And then what I do is I get to the individual books, and like the origins of Marvel Comics, I have the cover reprinted, and then I will do a 1-page quick summary of how I created the particular character, in this case, Weapon Tex-Mex. Even though El Muerto's in this comic with him, but I wanted to focus on Weapon Tex-Mex, one of my characters. And then the story's reprinted. And, like I mentioned before, I'm going to go through every one of my comics in my catalog over the whatever months or years I do this show, and we'll do like just look through the whole book and talk about the making of the comic, and I'll show you artwork and sketches and all that. But for the purpose of this video, I just want to basically show you how I compiled my own book collection of origin stories, I guess. So the Man Swamp again, introduction, and then the story here. So basically, it's all fine. In the Coma, it's another comic I did. But this has a big history to it. I mean, it was because it's very involved in trying to come up with this character and figure him out. Right, kind of go with that Steve Ditko psychedelic, mind-bending universe type of character. But we'll talk about him later, of course. But basically, I wanted to compile, some of my history in a book, and a lot of it was inspired by the How to Draw Comics, the origins of Marvel Comics. So I think that's it for now. Like I said, we'll get back to all these different characters, and share the video, let everybody know about it, or let people who you think would like it know about it. And if you can, please subscribe to the page, to the channel, so every time I put up a new episode, you'll get a message letting you know what's up. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk again later. Bye.